Hey, Shalom, Israel. Yahweh Bashem Yahushua Barakatham. To the brothers, Yahweh Shemalatham Bashem Yahushua. To the sisters, this is the ISUPK started out at 1 West 125th Street, Harlem, New York, under Commander General Yohana. And since 1969, we've been teaching the truth concerning the Bible. And that truth being the so-called Black, Hispanic, and Native American Indian, or the 12 tribes of Israel. You're tuned in with Priest and Officer Hawamar. This is ISUPK Kentucky. And this is our Sunday night, what you didn't learn in history class, episode 7. Now, what we finna get into tonight, we're finna get into indigenous culture and who early explorers believed that the indigenous people were. And we're finna go through old books. We're finna go through old articles from the early 1800s. As usual, we got a few pictures to get into, but it's going to be a little more reading tonight. And then to finish off the class, I've got two Pan-African Grandmaster teachers, two of the conscious community's most revered Pan-African master teachers on cam admitting to be Native American Indians. Now, let me ask this question. How does a Native Indian become a Pan-African master teacher, Grand Master teacher? Just keep that question on you. We finna talk about how a Native Indian becomes a Pan-African Grand Master teacher. So let's go ahead and get into it. This is ISUPK Kentucky, which you didn't learn in history class, episode 7. All right, so the first source we're going to get into, is on the screen right here. And the source, like I said, it's going to be a little more reading tonight than usual. So you can see the source. And the source is Christopher Columbus and the participation of the Jews in the Spanish and Portuguese discoveries by Dr. M. Kayserlin, right? New York, Lawman's Green and Company, 1894. Again, Christopher Columbus and the participation of the Jews in the Spanish and Portuguese discoveries by Dr. M. Kayserlin. This is from 1894. All right, so here's the source. This is on page 90. All right, page 90 says, under the ban of expulsion, persecuted and homeless from taking part in the voyages, among the explorers' companions whose names have come down to us, the complete list is lost. There were several men of Jewish stock. For example, Luis de Torres, a Jew who had occupied a position under the governor of Murcia and who was baptized shortly before Columbus sailed. He understood Hebrew, Chaldee, and some Arabic, and Columbus employed him as an interpreter. So Columbus had a Hebrew interpreter on his voyages to the so-called New World. On the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, there was a Hebrew interpreter on the ship. Now ask yourself this question: why would Columbus bring a Hebrew interpreter on his voyages to the New World? See, we've been lied to in history class And we've been lied with the myth. We've been lied to with the myth that Columbus was lost. This is proof right here, historical proof. This is evidence that Columbus was not lost. He knew exactly where he was going and knew exactly who he would find when he got here. And that's why he had a Hebrew interpreter on the ship. All right, let's get into it. All right, the next source on the screen is Aboriginal knowledge, containing all the original papers laid before Congress. History, antiquities, language, ethnology, pictography, rites, superstitions, and mythology of the Indian tribes of the United States by Henry R. Schoolcraft in 6 volumes. All right, this is volume 1, Archives of Aboriginal People, the Indian tribes of the United States. All right, so this is the source. All right. And it reads, in regard to the manners, customs, habits, etc. of the wild tribes of the Western Territory, a true and more correct type than any I've ever seen may be found in the ancient history of the Jews or Israelites after their liberation from Egyptian bondage. The medicine lodge of the Indian may be compared to the place of worship or tabernacle of the Jews, and the sacrifice, offerings, purifications, ablutions, and anointings may all be found amongst the practices of those people. So the author is comparing the customs of the native Indians of the Western Territory to the Jews. All right, if you keep reading, the customs of the Indian women at certain periods after childbearing are almost those of Jewish women. They have to undergo a probation of a certain number of days on all such occasions, besides absolutions and purifications, before they are considered fit to enter on their domestic duties. During this prohibition, they are considered unclean and altogether unfit to enter the lodge or join with the family, which is indeed they never attempt, but erect a hut for themselves where they remain the whole time, having their food brought to them. The manner of mourning for a deceased relative is very similar to that of the Israelites. In such cases, the men will cast off all their finery and put on instead the most worthless garments, and keep their heads and often body bedaubed with white clay, and during a time of mourning, which sometimes lasts 10 moons, this might be called putting on sackcloth and ashes. The women, on the other hand, cut off their hair and otherwise disfigure their persons by cutting. All right. So it's talking about comparing the native Indians of the Western Territory. They're comparing their practices to Hebrew and Israelite practices. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. All right, the next source is Israelite and Indian, a parallel and planes of culture. An address of Garrett Mallory, American Association for the Advancement of Science, August 1889. All right, this is the Israelite and Indian, a parallel and planes of culture. All right, let's see what the book says. All right, it says many authors have contended that North American Indians were descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Prominent among them was James Adair, whose work highly useful with regard to the customs of the southeastern Indians, among whom he spent many years, was mainly devoted to proof of the proposition. The Reverend Ethan Smith is also conspicuous, and even the last book discussing the Indians, published last year, bearing the comprehensive title, The American Indian, favors the same theory. The authors of the school mentioned have for their excuse the fact that I freely admit with greater emphasis that an astounding number of customs of North American Indians are the same as those recorded of the ancient Hebrews, but the lessons to be derived from the parallel between the Indians and the Israelites is very different from that of the descent advocated. So it's talking about many authors have contended that North American Indians were descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. All right, like I said, the sources right here: Israelites and Indian, the parallel and planes of culture. August 1889. And it says many authors have contended It says many authors have contended that North American Indians were descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. All right. Next source. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of reading in this particular episode, but there's a lot of history you got to cover. Again, this is what you didn't learn in history class, episode 7. All right. The next source is Publications of the American Jewish Historical Society, number 11. All right. Publications of the American Jewish Historical Society, number 11. All right. It says the Jews of New England, other than Rhode Island, prior to 1800. It says the Puritan Revolution in England had awakened a keen interest in the Jewish race, and this interest was powerfully reflected in early New England history. It is in Massachusetts that this tendency was most strongly exhibited. Hebrew was carefully taught at Harvard College, and the restoration of the Jews was one of the most popular topics. In 1649, Eliot, a missionary, announced that the Indians were of Hebrew origin. Again, announced that the Indians were of Hebrew origin. In the following year, Dowman issued an appeal to Englishmen for contributions to Indian missions on the plea that those of New England were of Jewish descent. When in 1650, Thorogood published his Jews in America, Eliot of Massachusetts at once proclaimed that the 37th chapter of Ezekiel principally applied to the Indians as such Jews. All right. Again, the source is Publications of the American Jewish Historical Society, number 11. And it says, 1649, Eliot, a missionary, announced that the Indians were of Hebrew origin. Of Hebrew origin. All right. Next source. All right. Next source. Ecclesiastical History of New England. Religious but also Moral by Joseph Felt. Volume 2, 1862. Ecclesiastical History of New England, 1862. All right. Let's see what it says. All right. It says George Hardin of Marblehead, presented for speaking against the ordinance of baptism, is sentenced to pay 40 or be whipped. July 8, Eliot communicates in his purpose to Whitefield for translating the Bible into the Indian tongue and educating some Indian youths, and mentioned the need of help from the charitable. He previously communicated his opinion that the Indians here were of Hebrew origin. All right, we had another source, Ecclesiastical History of New England, 1862, where it says that the Indians are of Hebrew origin. All right, the Indians are of Hebrew origin. And again, this is what you didn't learn in history class, episode 7. And I'm going to drop source after source after source on y'all tonight. All right, the next one is an article. All right, Literary Digest, September 21st, 1912, are the Indians of Hebrew origin. All right, it says William Penn gave the clue to many subsequent biblical scholars in declaring that he had found in American Indians the lost tribes of Israel. All right, William Penn gave the clue to many subsequent biblical scholars in declaring that he had found in the American Indians the lost tribes of Israel. The resemblance between the two peoples was so striking. It says, when I look at their children, I imagine the Jewish quarter in London. All right, it says that the American Indians are the lost tribes of Israel. This is Literary Digest, September 21st, 1912. The article is Are Indians of Hebrew Origin? All right, the next source. All right, the next source. It says History of the American Indians, particularly those nations adjoining to the Mississippi, East and West Florida, Georgia, South and North Carolina, and Virginia, containing an account of their origin, language, manners, religions, civil customs, laws, form of government, punishment, conduct in war and domestic life, their habits, agriculture, manufacturers, etc. It says a complete Indian system. All right, this is a history of the American Indians. All right, let's see what the source says. All right, it says, let us turn now to the copper-colored American Hebrews. It says the copper-colored American Hebrews, another source that shows that the indigenous people of the Americas are Israelites. All right, here's the source, History of the American Indians. It says, now let us turn to the copper-colored American Hebrews. All right, now we're going to get into James Adair. Right, we're going to get into James Adair. All right, it says a trader with the Indians of the southern states. He resided in their country for 40 years, beginning in 1735, and was almost entirely cut from civilized society. And from the year 1744, he resided chiefly amongst the Chickasaw. He published a very elaborate work on their manners, endeavoring to prove them to be descendant of the Jews. It is entitled The History of the American Indians, particularly those nations adjoining Mississippi, East and West Florida, South Carolina, etc. This was the source that we just read from in the previous slide. All right. And it says he set out to prove that the American Indians were descendants of the Israelites. All right. All right. It says, from the most exact observations I could make in the long time I traded among the American Indians, I was forced to believe them lineally descended from the Israelites. All right. So another page from the History of the American Indians, right? James Adair. It said, from the most exact observations I can make trading among the native Indians, I was forced to believe them lineally descended from the Israelites. Right, another source proving that the indigenous Americans are the Israelites. All right. All right, the next source. All right, the next source, A Nation Now Extinct, American Indian Origin Theories as of 1820. All right, here's the source. All right. It says, it's going to talk more about James Adair. All right, it says, by far the most persuasive of all Americans to defend the Lost Tribes theory was the historian and anthropologist James Adair, who, following the tradition of the great French-Canadian missionary, says spent 40 years among the American Indians. In the history of the American Indians, 1775, Adair was perhaps the first to argue less on biblical. It says first to. All right, less on biblical grounds and more on the scientific basis that the Indians had originated from Jewish stock. Refuting the pre-Adamite theory, he believed that the Indians have lineally descended from Adam. Adair carefully observed Indian cultures, their rites, festivals, and religious ceremonies, their monotheistic belief in one God of the Great Spirit, their reckoning of time, their traditions of sacred men and prophets. It says such arguments as Crawford and later elucidated by Elias Boudinot, founder of the American Bible Society, in his famous A Star in the West, offering little in the way of new evidences. Boudinot nonetheless argued that many, though not all, of the Indians were Israelites. All right, so another source proving that the American Indian are descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel. All right, the next source. All right, the next source we're finna get into. All right, it says a discourse on the evidences of the American Indians being the descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. This is from 1837. All right, discourse on the evidences of the American Indians being descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. And let's see what it says. All right, it is, however, in the religious belief and ceremonies of the Indians that I propose showing some of the evidences of their being, as it is believed, descendants of the dispersed tribes. Its opinion is founded, first, in their belief in one God, second, in the computation of time by their ceremonies of the new moon, three, in their divisions of the year in 4 seasons, answering to the Jewish festivals and the Feast of Flowers, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacle, and other religious holy days. Fourth, in the erection of a temple after the manner of our temple, and having an Ark of the Covenant, and also erection of altars. Fifth, by the division of the nation into tribes with a chief at their head. Sixth, by the laws, sacrifices, ablutions, marriages, ceremonies, and war and peace, the prohibition of eating certain things, fully carrying out Mosaic institutions, traditions, history, character, appearance, affinity of their language to the Hebrew, and finally that the everlasting covenant of heirship exhibited in a perpetual transmission in his seal of their flesh. If I shall be able to satisfy your doubts and curiosity on these points, you will certainly rejoice with me discovering that the dispersed of the chosen people are not the lost ones, that the promise held out to them have been thus far realized, and that all the prophecies relative to their future destination will in due time be strictly fulfilled. So it's talking about the customs of the native Indians being identical to the customs of the ancient Israelites. Here's the source: Discourse of the Evidences of American Indians being the descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. All right. All right. Next source: Letters and Notes of the Manners, Customs, and Condition of the North American Indian, Volume 2. This is from 1841. Letters and Notes of the Manners and Customs and Condition of the North American Indian, 1841. Let's see what it says. All right. I'm compelled to believe that the continent of America and each of the other continents have had their aboriginal stocks, peculiar in color and in character, and that each of these native stocks have undergone repeated mutations at periods of which history has kept no records, by erratic colonies from abroad that have been engrafted upon them, mingling with them and materially affecting their original character. By this process, I believe that the North American Indians, even where we find them in their wildest condition, are several degrees removed from their original character, and that one of their principal alloys has been a part of those dispersed people who have mingled their blood and customs with them, and even in their new disguise seem to be followed up with oppression and endless persecution. The first and most striking fact amongst the North American Indians that refers us to the Jews is that of their worshiping in all parts the Great Spirit, or Jehovah, as the Hebrews were ordered to do by divine precept. Instead of a plurality of gods, as the ancient pagans and heathens did, and their idols of their own formation, the North American Indians are nowhere idolaters. They appeal at once to the Great Spirit and know of no mediator, either personal or symbolical. The Indian tribes are everywhere divided into bands with chiefs, symbols, badges, etc. Many of their modes of worship I have found exceedingly like those of the Mosaic institution. All right, so again, it's comparing the tradition of the American Indians to the Israelites. It says, as the Jews they have their high priests and prophets amongst the Indians as amongst the ancient Hebrews. All right. More sources: Letters and Notes of the Manners and Customs and Condition of the North American Indian, 1841. Again, comparing the customs of the native Indians to the Hebrews. All right. All right. The next source is the Seminoles of Florida. All right. The Seminoles of Florida. Right. This is from 1920, Museum of American Indian. All right. Seminoles of Florida, Museum of American Indian. This is 1920. All right, it says Indians full of confidence and kindly feeling had consented to sign, and here appeared the wonderful Yes, startling observation made by Bishop Gray. Javeh is the Hebrew word meaning Jehovah, a word held in such awe by the children of Israel, and is claimed by scholars too sacred to pass the lips of man. Today, in the weird fastness of the Everglades, a band of wild Indians chanted the name of the great Jehovah in the Hebrew tongue, a name that is meaningless in its original form to thousands of educated Americans. When questioned by Bishop Gray as to the meaning of the sacred word, the Indian answered, God, white man's God. The question now appeals to scientists, to the antiquarian, and to the theologian, from whence came the seminal knowledge of the word. From its use in the depth of the Everglades as one of many who worked to the prehistoric ruined temples of Mexico and Yucatan, so similar to those of Egypt, and thus may find in a seminal speech a language linked to connect the new world with the old. Is this single word, as verified by Bishop Gray, the keynote to the history of the origin of the North American Indian? Prescott, in his History of Mexico, refers to some traditions of the Aztecs as bearing a singular resemblance to those found in the scriptures. More or less does one start with the surprise and awe as he notes the Indians of Florida, a strict observance of those customs, as well as religious beliefs laid down in the book of Leviticus. So it's talking about the Seminole Indians following the traditions of the books of Leviticus, of the book of Leviticus. All right. Not the least startling, after 34 centuries do we find the Seminole observing the original laws of health as laid down to the children of Israel after the Exodus. With reference to the preservation of health, we find in the scriptures that those affected by disease were separated from the tribe. And his health returned, we read in Leviticus 15:13. Then shall he number himself 7 days after for his cleansing, and wash his clothes and bathe his flesh, and run of water to be clean. Verse 7, and whosoever touches the flesh on him shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. Note the following: on a recent visit to the Seminole camps, and after receiving a warm welcome from the squaws and pickaninnies of former acquaintances, a solitary figure was observed sitting in a small detached wigwam. Approaching for the purpose of shaking hands from all sides came gesticulations and dissenting tones from the squaws, and feeling that the woman was a prisoner or taking some kind of punishment, we passed on. During a visit of 3 days at the camps, the squaw was kept aloof from the band, receiving all necessary attention with the kindliest spirit, but fulfilling the law of Moses as recorded in Leviticus. And she shall be apart 7 days, and whosoever touches her shall be unclean. The Aztec made crimes against society capital. Among their registered laws, adultery was punishable, as with the Jews, by death. The same laws hold good amongst the Seminoles today. Marriage laws are held sacred, but divorces are permitted, where some incompatibility of temper is found. This is done after the manner of the Jews, out of mercy to the woman. Either party may marry again, but the marriage must meet with the approval of the leaders of the band. Taking up the question of land tenure, one sees similarities of the Everglade Indians and that of the ancient tribes. The Seminole, like his Aztec ancestors, show an honorable contract with other tribes of North America in the treatment of women. No severe agricultural labor is imposed upon them, and the consideration shown by the men would do credit to a high civilization, those who know some of the habits of the Florida Indians. All right. So that'll do it with the sources. But I do got a few images I want y'all to take a look at here. All right, this is a Mayan statue, right? The biblical tribe of Zebulun And if you look in the earring, it's a shield of David right there in the earring. Now, what is a shield of David doing in Central America? What is a shield of David doing amongst the Mayans? And not only the Mayans. All right, this is a picture of an Iroquois woman. All right, Iroquois Native Indian. Now, if you look at the baby, if you look on the garment, you see another shield of David. Again, the reason why Christopher Columbus had a Hebrew interpreter on the ships is because he knew exactly where he was going and knew exactly who he would run into when he got here. So you see the shield of David on the baby here, on the garment. So it's a shield of David with the Iroquois and a shield of David with the Mayans. All right. Now, before we get into what I was going to talk about, with the with these two Pan-Africans, we got to start with a brief history of Pan-Africanism and where it comes from. Now, Pan-African, the ideas of Pan-Africans come from these three people right here. All right, Richard Allen, Absalom Jones, and James Forten. All right, if I may Google these people here: Richard Allen, Absalom Jones, and James Forten. All right, these are three founders of the AME Church, the African Methodist Episcopal, and they were all three founding fathers of the United States. All right, these are three Black founding fathers of the United States. And I've asked this question before: how can you be a founding father and not be a colonizer? All right, I'll say it again. How can you be a Black founding father and not be a colonizer? All right, Richard Allen, Absalom Jones, and James Forten, AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal. All right. And this devil right here. All right. Google Melville Herskowitz. This is the father of Africana studies. This is the father of Africana studies. All right. Melville Herskowitz. So keep them names in mind. All right. We got Richard Allen, Absalom Jones, James Forten, Melville Herskowitz. All right. Now we have Marcus Garvey in a photo with Walter Plecker. Now, Walter Plecker was one of the main people involved in the paper genocide of the North American Indian. All right. This devil right here is one of the main people responsible for the paper genocide of North American Indian. All right. He was responsible. It's on record. He is responsible for changing Native Indian birth certificates, changing them from Native Indian to Black, Negro, or color. All right. And he's in the picture with the man pushing the Back to Africa movement. So we got the devil right here changing Native Indian birth certificates to Negro, Black, and colored. And then you got his buddy right here pushing the Back to Africa movement. All right. Now, before we get into it, I got a quick video for y'all.
Your own language, your own religion, and your own way of acceptance.
In Rhode Island, some citizens who did not own property had to wait until 1928 before they were granted voting rights. But three groups were still officially barred by state law from casting a ballot: paupers, the mentally incompetent, and Indians. The only way the Narragansetts could participate in elections was by identifying themselves as African Americans. Charles Ernest Hazard confronted officials who enforced this practice. His brother, Joseph, one of the oldest members of the Narragansett Nation, recalls the moment.
Let's run this back.
Forget who you are. Never forget you have your own language, your own religion, and your own way of acceptance.
In Rhode Island, some citizens who did not own property had to wait until 1928 before they were granted voting rights. But three groups were still officially barred by state law from casting a ballot: paupers, the mentally incompetent, and Indians. The only way the Narragansetts could participate in elections was by identifying themselves as African Americans. Charles Ernest Hazard confronted officials who enforced this practice. His brother, Joseph, one of the oldest members of the Narragansett Nation, recalls the moment.
Indians couldn't vote, so he went up to the State House and he says, it's on the charter that the Indians can't vote. And he says, "You vote, nature?" And he says, "No." He says, I consider myself a Narragansett Indian. If I vote, I'm voting under Negroes could vote, but not an Indian.
Forget who you are. Never forget religion and your own way of acceptance.
All right. All right. So we talked about the AME Church, the origins of Pan-Africanism. We talked about Melville Herskowitz, the father of Africana Studies. We talked about Walter Plecker being responsible for paper genocide. And we have Native Indians not being allowed to vote unless they identified as Negro, Black, or colored. All right. Indians not being able to vote unless they self-identified as Negro, Black, or colored. All right, let's get into it. I said I had two Pan-Africans on tape admitting to be Native Indian. All right, the first one is Leonard Jeffries. Now, Leonard Jeffries is one of the most renowned historians in the conscious community. All right, Leonard Jeffries, university administrator, professor, Pan-Africanist, born January 1937, Newark, New Jersey. All right, to Leola Smith Jeffries of Lynchburg, Virginia, and office secretary, and Leonard Jeffries of Akron, Ohio. All right, let's scroll down to his bio. All right, it says, well, at City College of New York, instructor 1969, Jeffries and John Henry Clark, there's another one, established the African Heritage Studies Association. From 1969 to 1973, Jeffries was chair of Black Studies at San Jose College in San Jose, California, where he promoted the idea that unlike traditional academic discipline, Black Studies was intimately related to the community. Thus, in 1971, Jeffries led protests against the police following their killing of John Henry Smith, the African-American IBM research chemist. All right, it says in 1973, CCNY President Robert Marshak recruited Jeffries to return. and tenured full professor chair of Black Studies Department, a post he held for 20 years, helping it become the largest programs that field in that field nationally. It says Jeffries became oral history director at Carnegie-funded Kente Library for Black genealogical research in Washington. He also consulted Alex Haley's Roots in 1977 television miniseries that followed. All right. This is one of the most famous Pan-Africans according to the conscious community. All right. Leonard Jeffries, Pan-African. All right, but let's hear it out his own mouth.
He proved it, that the Powhatan Indian Nation was a part of our family. In fact,
he said, "What now?" Let's hear it again.
He proved it, that the Powhatan Indian Nation was a part of our family. In fact,
Leonard Jeffries, Pan-African, right here on tape, said he was a Powhatan Indian. Now, how does a Pan-African, or Salaki, how does a native Indian become a Pan-African Grandmaster teacher? Let's play it again.
She proved it, that the Powhatan Indian Nation was a part of our family. In fact, her grandfather, he refused to accept completely the Christian formula that we had used to adjust to. So he had businesses and other activity, and when he died, the rumor was he didn't want that complete Christian burial, and so he didn't die right, but that he wanted to have some Native American traditions moving into his passing.
So his grandfather wanted to be buried with Native Indian traditions. All right. And he said he was a Powhatan Indian. His grandfather wanted to be buried with a traditional Native Indian burial. All right. How does a Native Indian become a Pan-African? How does a Native Indian become one of the conscious community's most renowned Pan-African Grandmaster teachers? All right. I got you on tape admitting to be a Native Indian. How come it's not in your bio? How come Pan-Africanist is in your bio, but not this? All right. Now, the next one I want is Professor James Small. Professor James Small is another one of the conscious community's most renowned Pan-African teachers. All right, let's get it. All right, Professor James Small. You see in the background, it's got all this Egyptian stuff in the background. All right, there go Leonard Jeffries right here. Leonard Jeffries. All right, let's scroll down here. All right, Professor James Small. All right, that's him right here, Professor James Small. All right, it says during this period, Professor Small had the opportunity to interact with such historical giants as Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, Kwame Ture, H. Rap Brown of the SNCC, Eldridge Cleaver, Zaid Shakur, and Lumumba Shakur of the Black Panther Party, in which he served as a liaison between the Black Panther Party and the OAAU. Professor Small has been a member of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization. All right, a member of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization. For 14 years, he served as president of the ASCAC Eastern Region for 2 years, where he worked and studied with John Henry Clark, Dr. Joseph Ben Jochannan, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Asa Hillier, Wade Nobles, Amos Wilson, Francis Quest Welsing, just to name a few. Professor Small taught for 15 years at the University of New York, including 13 of those years at the City College of New York, Black Studies Department, 2 years at the New York City Technical College. Professor Small has taught courses on Malcolm X, traditional African religion. Professor Small is a priest in the Yoruba religion, Pan-Africanism, crime in the urban community, urban crisis and issues, and African folklore. All right, African folklore. All right, so that's Professor Small. All right, there he goes right here. I want y'all to get a good look. Got the African garb. I remember he's a Yoruba priest and Pan-African. You see, he got the ankh right here. All right, let me put this to bed real quick. All right, this is Professor James Small.
If we don't have no African, what do you say to that? Those people look just like me and you, brother. But and they fighting against us. On the brothers and sisters. So those who said it, I said, okay, I can't do nothing, partner. And that is the argument between me and you. And for those who call themselves Native American, I am Native American.
Wait. Hold on now. Let's see this again.
If we don't have to say to that, those people look just like me and you, brother. But and they fighting against us. On the brothers and sisters. So those who said it, I said, okay, I can't do nothing, partner. And that is the argument between me and you. And for those who call themselves Native American, I am Native American.
Wait, he's what? Let's hear it again.
And for those who call themselves Native American, I am Native American.
I am Native American. Professor James Small, Yoruba priest, Pan-African grandmaster teachers. What?
If we don't have no African, what do you say to that? Those nothing, partner. And that is the argument between me and you. And for those who call themselves Native American, I am Native American.
God damn, man. One more time. I got to hear this again. They got to be playing. Professor James Small, Pan-African, Yoruba priest, got the big ankh on his shirt right here. What do you say? One more time. One more time for those in the back.
Argument between me and you. And for those who call themselves Native American, I am Native American.
God damn, drop the bomb. Where's the bomb at? Where's the bomb drop at? Look, we have Native American Indians promoting this Pan-African nonsense. We have Native American Indians pushing this Pan-African nonsense. And if I may, before we end the class, man, shout out to Captain Tazariak, ISUPK, Under Commander General Yohana. Shout out to Captain Tazariak for body bagging the conscious community, for being undefeated. He just beat the mascara off of Shaka Atmos, if I may. So shout out to Captain Tazariak. All right, so we have Native American Indians pushing this Pan-African garbage. All right, so if I may, we'll go ahead and end the class on that note. This is what you didn't learn in history class, episode 7. Shalom. Yahweh B'Hashem Yahweh Shai Barakatham. Yahweh Shemar Latham B'Hashem Yahweh Shai. Class dismissed.